Well, move attention now to, well, not exactly a matter not that different from some of these arguments going back and forth. What happens to the state? What happens to the people? You and I at the other end of the ladder. Today we've got Dr. Charles Akinola, who is a development policy expert. Thank you for coming on this morning, Doctor.
Thank you.
Well, just listening to this conversation about, what happens to the people, the states have a huge role to play at the end of the day. You have consulted for a number of states in terms of policy directive and direction. How should they proceed to ensure that poverty doesn't become the lead thing at the end of the day? What's your impression about the capacity of states, for instance, to meet up with the needs, in this case, of workers paying this wage?
Well, thank you for inviting me. And just to say, from a poverty perspective, wages actually is a policy tool in around reducing poverty reduction and also social justice. I mean, that, wages have also been defined that way. But I'd like to quickly make a distinction between wages and salaries. In the classical sense, people involved in development studies, development policy, poverty studies, will tell you that wages apply a lot more to people at the bottom of the pyramid. So it's a policy tool to help address the kind of social injustice, or the harshness, the shocks that people at that bottom of the lowest rung of the labor ladder face. So in that regard, when people look at wages, people might be inclined to want to address issues of wages quite differently. I mean, for people at the lowest rung of the ladder, quite differently from people who are not, who are right at the top of the ladder. You see in other climes that wages are paid on hourly rates, and you see salaries are paid, monthly, paid well after you have worked. So I think really in looking at this raging crisis on wage, I think it's important to look at two major areas. You're looking at the capacity of the states to pay, which really is varied. If you're looking at what wages are, people talk about take-home pay. Mm-hmm. Then it's about what really helps you cover your costs of accommodation, transportation, feeding, clothing. And you see that will also vary from location to location.
Yeah, and speaking about location to location, let me see if we could situate this one. At the end of May 2018, Nigeria had about 87 million people in extreme poverty, compared with that of India, which is about 73 million, who eclipsed it. But the recent MBS UNDP reports did indicate that Osun State had the lowest poverty incidence in Nigeria. I think they had about 17.5%. They were even ahead of Lagos. So one then wondered, look, given the history of the recent history of Osun State, how do you think that figure came about?
The poverty rate is actually much lower. We have two things. There's a 37. There's the unemployment rate.
National unemployment figure?
No, yes.
Or state unemployment figure?
State unemployment figures. What the UNDP and the National Bureau of Statistics did actually in 2018 is to work on the most comprehensive approach, which really has this built on what we had in 2016. You see the computation of poverty index, the so-called multi-dimensional poverty index. Mm-hmm. It's a rigorous approach involving academics, the UN agencies, civil society, and the like, in computing statistics that show how people, how much people are deprived. Looking at poverty along two major dimensions of monetary poverty and non-monetary poverty. And then so they came up with the most comprehensive one in 2018, which is looking at four major dimensions of poverty: health, education, unemployment or employment, and then living standards. So they have about 10 indicators all across those four dimensions. And then poverty is then measured in terms of what share of the population fall into the bottommost 30% in terms of your deprivations. If you are deprived of education, if you are deprived of water, deprived of health access, and all of them.
Yeah, but look, what exactly did Osun do to get this figure?
Well, there's a wide range of interventions in Osun, and some of these really have been spoken to widely recently. Osun has invested in infrastructure in ways that have opened up the space, the rural space, for agriculture, for commerce. So you see a lot more people are involved in agriculture, being driven out of poverty because they have market access. Osun, over the past 8 years, has brought 400,000 people out of poverty. So that's related to what you see in those statistics, which gives Osun the highest, the state with the lowest poverty rate in the country, followed by Anambra, and then followed by Lagos. That same study also gave Osun out as the state that has the least unemployment figures in the country. The rate is actually 6.7, down from 37% in 2010. So that's really very remarkable. What have they done? Osun has invested in the much talked about Osun Youth Employment Scheme that has brought about 60,000 people into employment over the past 8 years. Osun has invested in programs in the micro, small, medium enterprise sector. And you see quite a number of people working on the Anchor Borrowers program, our grower schemes, which really has enabled smallholders to have access to capital and to market.
So the other states haven't invested as much in these areas?
Well, the other states have not. We do have states, I must really say this, that the report of UNDP and the National Bureau of Statistics speaks to Anambra comes in second, followed by Lagos. I think generally the report gives lowest poverty indicators for the Southwest, and then followed by the Southeast, and then the South-South. North Central comes fourth, and then we have Northwest with the not very impressive figures at this point.